The time has come. Thank you for being here today and sitting in our maze so we can have some conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about mission and vision as seen through the life and words of three people and one congregation, namely ours. Oh, I gotta use this thing. I have to move it on the phone so I can see what's going on. So this is just a very quick review slide of Luke's gospel and what's happening in this particular section of Luke. I thought Jennifer Peets did a great job of introducing us to Luke last time. She had a map that's similar to this. Is there a little light on here?
Center button.
The center button. Okay. All right, great. And she used a map like this as well. So I'm just going to point out some of these locations and keep Capernaum in mind when we get looking at Luke 4, which is going to be our first stop today. So right before this, well, last week, you remember Jesus was baptized, and then he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested. We don't really know exactly where the wilderness is, but here's the Jordan River, so somewhere over here, probably, maybe down here, maybe as far down as this. I don't know. We don't know exactly. And then Jesus left there and goes to the synagogue in Nazareth, which was a very small town in Galilee. Immediately after this, he's going to go to cast out demons and heal. In other words, he's going to start to fulfill his mission statement back in Capernaum. And I ask you to think about that or remember that when you hear the story that we're going to look at next. This is the text that we hear for today. And if you haven't been to church yet and heard Pastor Peter's sermon, it actually got applause. So just in case you haven't heard it.
So second service people.
Second service, yeah. Exactly.
Don't want the first service people to show you up.
Exactly. That was my whole point. So we're in the synagogue in Nazareth, which is Jesus' hometown. He's going to his home church. Think about that, first of all. He quotes the Isaiah scroll when he speaks his mission statement, and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." That's his mission statement. And then he says immediately after, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Just looking at this mission statement, I thought about it today in church, that as I was listening to it, there's a similar statement has already been made in Luke's gospel. The theme has already been spoken. Does anybody remember where that is?
Magnificat.
The Magnificat, yeah. Mary's words in Luke 2. She touches on this. She's talking about the mighty one, about God. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the imaginations of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Challenging. if you're rich. Or if you're high up. And Jesus seems to be making some of the same comments here. So. So there's one Bible in each group, just in case we need a reference. This group is so smart, you probably won't need it anyway, but how did the people respond to Jesus when he spoke his mission statement and then said, "This is fulfilled in your hearing"? How did they respond to it at first?
No,
They
first
were
they
accepted
accepted
it,
it,
yeah.
they were amazed.
They were amazed.
Yeah.
This is their native son, their kid, you know, he probably made somebody's fence. Maybe he made a cradle for someone down the road with his father. They knew him. And they were pretty amazed that he spoke with this authority, that he spoke with the scriptures. They were very happy about that. But how do they respond after he challenges their expectations?
Chased him out.
Chase them out.
That was troubling to hear I had forgotten, they wanted to push him over the cliff.
Right.
Oh, that was awful.
It was also in that passage that he noted that we had plenty of poor here. Or we had this ill right around us, but we went and outside to another country to heal someone or to help someone.
Yeah, in the Old Testament, he's referring to
Yeah.
these. So this is what gets them riled up, isn't it?
Yeah,
Is he talks about God working, and you'll hear this in the sermon also if you haven't already been there. God working among
I
outsiders.
forget where.
The widow of Zarephath and Naaman the
Yeah.
Syrian.
Yeah,
They got healing, they got fed. That's what Jesus' mission is, to heal, to feed, to lift up. And God had a wider vision, and the people didn't really like that. You mean God cares for all people, not just us chosen people? That was the reaction.
I can almost imagine them saying, who in the neighborhood are you going to heal or help that needs you, right? here?"
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So he says that, doesn't he? He says, if I can find the passage, this is verse 23. He said that doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, "Doctor, cure yourself," and you will say to me, "Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum."
Mhm.
The reason I wanted you to think about Capernaum on the map is that technically in Luke's gospel, he had not been there yet. He probably has been there, but it's curious that he says, "You want me to do the things that you've heard I've done in Capernaum." Well, he doesn't actually get to Capernaum in Luke's gospel until verse 31 after he leaves here. But he's probably been there. He probably made a stop there before he came home.
Verses 14 and 15 suggest that
Suggests that he
he's
was
been
in,
around.
he was in the region, but doesn't actually
Doesn't
say,
name Capernaum.
doesn't say Capernaum exactly. So the first question for you to have some conversation about. There we go. How does Jesus' mission statement speak to you? What does it say to you? We're just going to take about 5 minutes in your conversation group to talk about that. Try to let each person say something if they want to. We'll just do that and then we'll move on to the next person, witness.
Scott, can you flip back to the mission statement, please?
Sure, sure. You can do that.
The more seconded.
Here it is.
Says the recovery
I
of
think
the
there's
hearing
there's
is
something
defined
about
that figure to
these things that are in each of us. We're all captures.
We're blind.
We're all.
He did all the. I mean, this man-
I think there's.
referring to in the release. Yeah.
My initial reaction is, holy.
But Jesus has now been.
Our country.
It kind of speaks to that whole reference.
Yeah.
I think the important knowing this.
Spiritual, mental, physical.
They were good.
Right.
That's another thing.
I mean, speaking to me and, you know.
Somebody or something.
Do a whole study.
Yeah.
Especially about.
Material.
I say it's in this.
Really.
I think so, yeah.
Could be,
Yeah, about
some
the sermon.
Yeah, illness.
How about recovery?
I know
It may
when
not,
we go to town,
I
it's
think
the,
it may not have.
one of the things I'm.
Not.
I think pictures of the things that strike my sense is the mission.
The prophecy.
Not just
What gets caused by or what gets like.
the giants that have those signs are important. And again, it just resonates with what's happening from Isaiah.
That brings to mind about visions too,
Again, about how this
can really feel good at night. I can start actually.
the mental. I mean, one of the things I wonder about God is that things are stirring up.
Do you think the,
Person at the declaration starting up.
Mission statement.
And I don't always.
Connotation with that becomes words that you dig into. They're saying.
Well, you could even the spirit of the Lord response is that you free from more. Let's say, important things. What does it relieve you from all
Is this a reference to the year of the Jubilee?
Yes. Which was, you know, was land was supposed to go back to people. The servants would be. I mean, yesterday.
I also think.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we pray to.
It's a little annoying too. The prophets were annoying, right?
Live in. No, we don't.
I think
That are not the prophets.
legitimate. Kings were anointed. Jesus
later, says all that.
The old sweet uncle.
I don't think there's a lot of evidence that Jubilee. This is after the temple.
Staff will tell me three people at that camp with
There's a lot of.
Period.
Then one day I was walking.
Is that a mission to do something in a certain time, or is that?
yeah, sometimes that's what, I mean, all like just the. You're not gonna have all the answers.
But he still said a lot. What was a part of that? Maybe you might have there's something you don't do. But God is.
That's just Washington.
You know.
Yes.
You're going out.
But there's things you didn't want. On my side. Talking about what it's. Good conversation. I really don't want Peter to be shortchanged. I think it's the second part of this, so I've got to move on, actually. You'll have more conversation. But it sounds like some really good conversations about what was Isaiah's words and the meaning. So the next voice and words and life we're going to see. Going. Martin Luther King, the mission and vision of Martin Luther King. Again, very hard to summarize in 10 or 15 minutes. Of course, tomorrow is the day celebrating his life. And ironically enough, it happens to be inauguration day as well. I won't say any more about that. Do you remember which president declared MLK Day?
Lyndon Johnson, wasn't it? Or no?
No,
Wasn't
not
it?
regional.
I think it was later,
Clinton, much
It
later.
was
Reagan.
Reagan?
might have been Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
Abraham Lincoln.
Ronald Reagan in 1983 declared it, but the country didn't start celebrating it until January of 1986. That was interesting to me, that Reagan was the one that.
He was an actor, he was playing a role the whole time.
What?
Okay, moving on.
Was the man.
So quickly. Highlights from his life, there were lots more highlights than this, but I'll just quickly go through this. He was a spokesman for the Montgomery bus boycott, which led to the Supreme Court ruling against transportation segregation. He was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference at age 28. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference was founded on the dream of redeeming the soul of America. Most of the advocating, of course, was in the South. He led the civil rights movement in Birmingham, where he was arrested, where he wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail. He led the March on Washington that same year in 1963, which is a march for jobs and freedom. That's where his I Have a Dream speech took place. Keep in mind, he's still only 33. He's doing that. In 64, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which made segregation illegal in hiring, public places like restaurants, transportation and education. And that same year, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, age 35. Congress passed the Voting Rights Act in 65, and in 65 through 68, he was especially focusing on economic issues. And that culminated in the Poor People's Campaign. Of course, he was assassinated in Memphis on April 4th, 1968. Here are some of his words, and only a meager few, since he's one of the most quoted pastors and civil rights leaders of his generation for sure, but maybe of all time. So these are just three that I picked out. I'll read them. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. I'm going to read that one more time, but I think it's very timely. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. That was from his Nobel Prize speech. A second one from a letter that was discovered in the mid-60s. Love is the greatest force in the universe. It is the heartbeat of the moral cosmos. He who loves is a participant in the being of God. It could be in a process theology.
Yep, it is.
Conversation with
It is.
that statement. And finally, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? From the speech in Montgomery. Another opportunity to have some conversation. Oops, I went too far. There we go. Which of these statements resonates most with you and why? So we'll just take, we're gonna limit this 5 minutes, speak fast. Which of these resonates most? They may all resonate with you, but which one the most? You have to pick. Why?
Yeah, the third one. What are you doing for others?
Paul, that's why you play. Stop laying and they're eating like crazy.
I was at Vietnam in 1968 or assassinated.
And Valerie.
And I had a lot of lineage. I was there, not in the military, but so here in agriculture. Had a black
Last one. That last one.
What do you get from it?
They're all big. And I tried.
All they did was they
Answer.
But I had a little bit of.
Each day.
Then Valerie.
Just where I am, I think I cannot. Not there. Passion.
Picking out my finger, had no way. Right there.
The one at the top is I want to be, I'm gonna it starts here. I know additional part that I have the final word reality. This is why I have to fight and say, oh, the rare,
You're using it as an excuse.
stronger than a part of it.
And there's something.
Stronger than.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it.
About
The first one.
I like that one.
You're gonna hear
You know, that's the strategy about it. Yesterday, one of the devotionals, and Samuel was a preacher. But he was a rough time. the middle of the night. You got a phone call or something.
And that kind of touches
And you realize, you know, even the darkness. Good morning. To get in the middle of the darkness in the night, you get that expression.
We won't discuss. All right, thank you. Gonna call you back. We want to make sure that Peter has an opportunity to talk about the last two parts of this. I'm just going to show you this slide. This is the vision center, the vision and mission that is existing in the King Center. We won't discuss this last question because of time. But the vision is we envision the beloved community where injustice ceases and love prevails. That's the vision of the King Center. And our mission is to empower people to create a just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world by applying Dr. King's nonviolent philosophy and methodology. And there must be a specific course or something that it's called Nonviolence 365. So keep those vision and missions statements in mind also as we look at the next two people.
Okay. This this camera that connects us with our participants who are watching on Zoom right now is fueled by AI technology. And something I've learned is, right? Something I've learned is you have to get the camera's attention and it will draw in and focus on you. And Scott, go to the mouse, except click on you see on the right side there, click the thing that says upper body. And that'll zoom in on me a little bit. On the right, way on the right. Way on that control panel, yeah. No, way on the right, of the screen, you see the pink button down below that. Now we got it, okay, sorry. We're still learning, but it's coming together. Jimmy, this was when we started planning this forum, we were just gonna do talk about Jesus, talk about Martin Luther King, because it's Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. Tomorrow's the day, and then our own mission statement. But you know, all of a sudden, you know, our lives were flooded with stories of Jimmy Carter and thinking about his life and witness, and it was startling, you know, when you sort of, you know, look at the legacy that he lived and the life he lived. Born in 1924, 100 years ago, almost 100, well, over 100 years ago, right? Just over 100 years ago. He went to the Naval Academy and graduated in 46 and had a career in the Navy for a while. Nuclear submarine. And then got into politics in 1963, elected to the state Senate, and within 10 years got elected governor of that state. And amazing to think, you know, Plains, Georgia there is nothing there. You know, we hear people talk about it. I have not been there, but there is nothing there, but there is Baptist church there that Jimmy was a member of for much of his life. So he was governor for 4 years, and during that time period was, you know, drawn into running for president in the post-Nixon era, and obviously was elected. And so I loved the quote of his grandson at his funeral, who said, you know, Jimmy only or grandpa, or papa is what he called it, right? Papa only lived in the governor's mansion for 4 years and in the White House for 4 years. And the other 92 years, he lived in Plains, Georgia.
Yeah.
Right? Can you imagine? Wow. So his presidency really had some key elements to it. Certainly, first and foremost, the focus on human rights, which was, I suspect, for those of you who maybe remember back then, was sort of a pretty revolutionary idea. Then to incorporate that into how he was oriented around the administration that he wanted to lead. The Camp David Accords were a central part of his story, and was really a multi-year process. It's really interesting to read about that today and how those discussions unfolded and the things that had to align in order for these other leaders, Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Rabin prior to him, really started the conversation with Anwar Sadat and Jimmy brokering the conversation, and how they were able to sort of continually keep coming back to the notion of peace and safety and security, and finding that common sensibility that enabled them to kind of put away their passionate dislike and distrust of the other, and find a way to find reconciliation. And that relationship between Israel and Egypt has not been without complications over the decades, but it has remained intact, right? If you think about that. And so that there's something really lasting and enduring about that. Obviously, the energy crisis. Who remembers the energy crisis of the late 70s? Right.
I remember filling up a camper with gas during the spike, and when it was 254 or something.
Oh my gosh, 250 for you. Right.
Per gallon.
But that was so. Much has been said and made of Carter's legacy post-presidency, and he's been celebrated as, and you've all heard the phrases that he was a more effective president after he was out of office, or effective leader, or effective in the world conversation and advancing these different things. I think that's a nuanced story. I think he was a pretty effective president. He only served for 4 years, of course. And so, and you all know the Iran hostage, really was the thing that kind of handicapped him in the public's imagination. And then, the movie star from Hollywood came along and changed everybody's imaginations. But post-presidency, through the work of the Carter Center, human rights, democracy, especially election integrity, a huge initiative. He monitored elections around the world, over 100 elections worldwide. He and his organization, of course, but he was on the ground, like he literally went to all these places. And then disease eradication, and hopefully you've heard the story about the guinea worm and how there were 3.5 million cases of guinea worm the year that Carter began this work. And in 2024, there were 14 known cases. So, I want to point out the photographs too. You've been looking at them, but this photograph, who remembers this scene? It's a little bit, maybe a little blurry, but this is Jimmy and Rosalind walking down the street in their inauguration parade. After he was sworn in, they walked to the White House. And this picture that is on here, if you look closely, it's actually a photograph of a photo album. It's my friend Becca's childhood photo album. She was at that parade and took this picture and captured Jimmy while he's not waving, he's holding up the I love you symbol. Or that maybe that was his wave of the day or something. Anyway, so, and the caption down here says, I was 6 and I got to go to this parade. and so anyways, Fast forward, Becca becomes Pastor Becca. And during a sabbatical a few years ago, she went and visited the Carters at Marantha Baptist Church down in Plains, Georgia, and got to participate in Bible study. Sundays, they call it Sunday school before worship. And there was a whole process for being there. But when it begins, Jimmy would find out a little bit of who was in the room, and he would ask any pastors to raise their hands. And Becca was the first to raise her hand. And subsequently he said, well, since you were the first to raise your hand, you will pray for us today. And then she got her picture taken with him afterwards. So kind of a neat deal. And then Becca, I didn't put this picture up here, but then she lives in Washington, D.C. and was she went and visited his body as it was laying in state in the Capitol Rotunda just prior to his funeral service at the National Cathedral. And it was the lying in state was you could visit until 7 a.m. on the morning of the funeral. So it was available all night long. So she decided to get up early and left her house at 5 a.m. and expecting, not knowing what to expect. Well, at that time of the day, there was nobody else there. There were people there, but she had no wait. She just literally walked into the Capitol, walked right to the coffin, and got to see a little changing of the guard ceremony. There were members of each branch of the service that were guarding the casket throughout. So anyway, so that's a little story about Becca. But so these are some personal photos. But faith was just the dominant thing in his life, in his sense of the calling that he felt he had from God. Shaped everything that he did. In all of his public work was deeply rooted in his sense of faith. His work with Habitat for Humanity, his ongoing peace talk and negotiation. He actually did have substantive conversation with the leader of North Korea at the time, right? This is after his presidency. He went as a private citizen and cooled some seriously rising tensions. I don't know if you all remember that period of time, but he obviously won the Nobel Peace Prize, as did Martin Luther King. In 2002, here he is with Bishop Desmond Tutu, and he just really embodied that sort of humble servant leader that quietly going about what mattered most to him, and highly effective. And so here are some things he is quoted as saying. War may sometimes be a necessary evil, but no matter how necessary, it's always an evil, never a good. We will not learn how to live together in peace by killing each other's children. I believe there's a statistic that Carter never, until that failed rescue attempt, never ordered a U.S. soldier into any sort of harmful action during his presidency. And that's probably part of why that episode was so devastating to him. I hate to see complacency prevail in our lives when it's so directly contrary to the teaching of Christ. You can't divorce religious belief and public service. I've never detected any conflict between God's will and my political duty. You violate one, you violate the other.
Amen.
Unless both sides win, no agreement can be permanent.
I loved when you said during your sermon what his grandson had said.
Yeah.
He's the same no matter what setting he is in.
Yeah. If you didn't watch the funeral service, the one part of it I would commend to you is the sort of the last eulogy offered by his grandson Jason, who works for the Carter Center now. It was eloquent and beautiful. So in your groups, which of these statements resonates with you or reflect on anything around Jimmy Carter that I've sparked your mind with? And then We'll just give that about 5 minutes, have some conversation.
Yes, join us.
My son are 15 to the.
How many of you think that one statement?
And Walter Mondale was there.
Both sides have to win.
So that's also, you know, part of the rest of the story. And he's been involved with the. And make sure that no problem. Yeah, yeah.
Releasing.
He's so excited. He's so close. He has a floor.
They could just.
And I hear from President. It was nice. Yeah, that's all. And the next area.
And others.
It still talks about.
And that's what strikes me.
Well, we don't.
The one that strikes me the most. And I get it, so what about when our children. Our son. And also make a ball. Yeah, and then violence.
Yeah, how many times you get it?
Similar. But I'll have my best to see from places. Not avail or life.
First one in meetings.
I've seen some of the similarities between that one actually and like the Martin Luther one.
One of the interesting nuances of roster leadership. We agreed to not
Today.
hold elected.
They're like.
While you're actually serving them. Remember if I wanted to run for city council, I would have a big time.
So it's kind of that complacency. And that's.
This is how.
You're not supposed to have like. Step away from your. Take a lead. In an elected position, but you know, so many of like you can't be a state legislator. Even those. You have to take a lead. Well, I think it has. Understanding that pastoral leaders are intended to be nonpartisan. We serve in a nonpartisan way. There's so much.
And today.
You could. On the retired roster. Age clearly does not matter.
That's how hard.
That comment you can't do. Yeah, when it's your own.
Buy that 100%. I would buy that 100%. The question is, how do you discern God's will? What do you think? A lot of those people, God's will is. Well, that's owned by political. But they would go more. Get out there and deal with the horses.
All right, we're gonna come back together because there's one more vision and mission question I want to put before you and have you do some wondering about. But clearly, there's a lot of inspiration we can draw from both Martin Luther King and Jimmy Carter in different ways, and thinking about the role of the church in public society is fascinating stuff. And so yeah. Anyways. One more vision statement and mission statement to take a look at. We are claimed, gathered, and sent to build the church and love the world. Our vision is for a vibrant community that seeks a transformational relationship with God, our neighbors, and one another, while responding authentically, creatively, and justly to the most compelling needs of our community. Put all of these things in conversation together. Jesus's mission, as has been, described by the words of the prophet Isaiah, what drove and fueled Martin Luther King Jr. and similarly for Jimmy Carter. And then where does this community of faith, fit into that story? And how does this reflect those other visions? Do they exist cooperatively? Is there any conflict? Is there, what comes to mind as you think about these things? Why don't we talk in small groups, and then I will try and get us together for a big group conversation right here at the tail end.
After today's service and after this deal, it strikes me that this is a little too parochial. I would change one word:
Ah,
our world,
in
not our community.
the mission statement, our vision is for a vibrant world. That's, yeah.
Well, vibrant community, but then our
The last word.
Oh, and the most compelling needs of our world is what you would say there. Yeah, interesting. Have some conversation in your groups about the mission and vision of this community.
Church, you think of the Catholic. Community, I don't know. For me, it seems like more inclusive. And I think it's great.
Well,
Yeah, to me, I've listened to all. Me perhaps do that, tradition, a lot of it comes like from a lot of something that's. But I agree about that being involved in some of the discussion.
but
But I think tradition, what I like about the tradition of still. The church is.
Could that be? Does that separate? Yeah.
What are we?
And I suppose.
Your people. So.
Just by children.
Maybe faith journey, probably. That may be for us,
But
with
just, it's like, I see.
see the Bible, see a picture of 8,000 miles away, and now it's like so high over. The first time I went out.
I would say people, but it just might. That might be struggle where it's
Yeah, I mean, like. You've got the church spreading its wings.
Sign like. We don't know what's fixed. It's gonna be supposed to be and. Right, sitting.
a law that allows for starting at.
Without.
Just an improvement. Together.
No.
It feels like, because I'm gesturing towards it. Great, Mel. Well, let's just have a quick, a large group, just, does anybody have any insight or epiphany that this is the season of epiphany that we're in? Does anybody have an epiphany from this morning's conversation that they want to offer up to the larger group at all? Quiet. Yes,
I
Kathy.
said something, I'd like to say it to everybody. This morning we sang, let us build a home or build a church. And I was saying, 20-some years ago, when we were gonna build a new sanctuary, we sang that song every Sunday.
Wow.
And we talked about that,
Wow.
and we ended up not building this new sanctuary, but I think we've built a new church. Because the tiny homes have started, we're now a reconciling congregation, and those were all things that were not. They weren't part of the conversation back then. I think there's been a lot more outreach, and I've seen that the congregation has grown.
Mhm, mhm.
That's neat.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Yeah, there are ways in which we can point to our mission statement and feel like maybe we're delivering on this, maybe, it's not, Michael said, there's definitely aspirational language here. But also we can celebrate the fact that God has accomplished this with us and is actively accomplishing these things. And so, yeah, Karen, what would you like to share?
I would like to share that I thought about what Rick said about including the word world versus one of the communities. I really like that idea of the community, the world, and that kind of elasticity. And the idea of transformation comes up, I don't know, it seems more possible with that elasticity between the world and our community.
In those lights, my response to Rick was that there's no way this small church can take on the problems of the world.
Right.
But we can take on some of the problems in our community.
Right,
Think of
That's-
Plains, Georgia.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and that's the same thought I had, Chris, to just respectfully disagree with how, Rick wanted to change that, and I thought, but I can't do the biggest stuff. I can only do what I can do in my community to be transformational.
David's had his hand up here for a bit,
But we do have a outreach with Tanzania, which is the world.
right?
So we are
Right.
somewhat outside of the small community into the world.
Yeah, and I would, don't discount that, that presence that we have there and that partnership that we have with that church. It may feel not so significant to us because we're not, living, eating and breathing that, but I'll tell you, every piece of, every story we get back from there is just amazing. And this is a plug. Go see it firsthand. Go with Jim and Karen this year, and you will be transformed by the power of that story of how that church is just taking off. Scott.
Very quickly, we actually do affect the world through the ELCA and through other partnerships, so I kind of liked Rick's.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The purpose of this exercise was not necessarily to wordsmith, but Deb wants to share something. Anyway, I'm gonna, because she's the president of our congregation, I'm giving her the last word of the morning.
Oh, that's scary.
Of this session. I get to preach yet.
All the way through, what struck me was transformation. Jesus says, I am here to transform. Martin Luther King says, all is possible with transformation of love and freedom. And what speaks to me deeply is we are always transforming in this group. If you could go back 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, there's something transformational going on, not only within this community, but it is within our outreach. I mean, how many of you are thinking, hey, next Tuesday, we need to do a caravan to support the next settled community and to help those who have such fear of what's going on, understand that we had them too, and it didn't happen. And we're there as their partners in God to make love happen in that community. And that's my only thoughts, because I was really struck by your statement.
Good last words. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks to Scott for helping get this rolling and getting this conversation started for us today. Grateful. Next Sunday, an opportunity to come and learn all about the revised and reimagined solar project for the roof, because we're going to be voting on that at the semi-annual meeting. So come and be familiarized with what we're going to be voting on. And that's the plan for next week. All right, we'll see you, some of you in worship in a few minutes.